Morning, church. Yesterday, I had the privilege of being at a wedding reception. I had a chance to dance with my wife. That was an amazing opportunity, the Keller wedding, and then it was the big anniversary dance. Everybody get out on the floor, everybody dance, and let's see who's been married the longest. And Bonnie and I took second place. Second place. 42 years, only the grandpa and grandma beat us. We were just one funeral away from winning. That's for this service only. You're the only ones who will show me grace in that, all right? All right, true story of a college girl who writes her parents. True story, all right? She writes, 2-page note. Dear Mom and Dad, just wanted to drop you a line to clue you in on my plans. I've fallen in love with a guy named Jim. He dropped out of school at age 16. He got married about a year ago, got divorced. We've been going together for 2 months. I plan to get married in the fall. Until then, I'm moving into his apartment, and I think I'm pregnant. At any rate, I dropped out of college last week, but I'd like to still finish someday. And then you turn the page over and it says, Mom and Dad, I just wanted to tell you that everything I've just written is false. None of it is true. However, it is true that I got a C in French and I failed math. It's also true that I need more money. Love, your daughter. Can you imagine how much money that dad is willing to send now to that child? What happened? The turning of a page. The turning of a page changed the whole perspective. Today we're going to wrap up our series, a short series on the prodigal son. This was all started out of the brainchild of our teenagers. They and Zach, they've been studying in depth the prodigal son. They presented that all when they did Youth Sunday at the beginning of this month, and I adopted it. I said, you know what? I've never dived that deep into one single story, and so the prodigal son for the last 4 weeks has been our topic, and it is again today. Today, the prodigal son finally turns a page in his life. He begins a new chapter. Many of us in this room know what that feels like, where we've walked away from an old life to find the joy of a new one. The prodigal son story is told in the Gospel of Luke. It's one of the deepest stories Jesus ever told. In fact, it's a phrase that's used even today in secular society. If you ask anyone, hey, what's your favorite parable of Jesus? Most of the time, you're either going to hear the Good Samaritan or the prodigal son. And secular society uses those phrases. That was a Good Samaritan moment. Oh, that's a prodigal moment. They use that phrase. And this all goes all the way back to 2 stories that Jesus told. But I'm just going to tell you that the prodigal son really has some deep things going on. It is packed with hidden reversals. It's packed with cultural shocks for that time. And it's packed with revelations about God. This is Jesus revealing who God really is. Now, why does Jesus tell this? Well, if you're in context, the reason it needed to be told is because of the Pharisees. The whole story begins in Luke 15 this way, Luke 15 verse 1. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathered around to hear Jesus. By the way, Jesus was just a magnet for people who had broken lives. They loved coming around him. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners, he eats with them. All right, that's the context. Jesus will go into 3 parables. Why? You don't understand the heart of your Father. That's the bottom line that he tells this story. So Jesus tells the parable of the lost sheep. Jesus tells the parable of the lost coin. And Jesus tells the parable of the lost son. But what he does in the prodigal son story is just phenomenal. A masterfully told story because it's for the audience of those Pharisees who are not they are not in line with the Father's values right now. And it begs the question of you and I, are we in line? Now, before I wrap up this whole series, I'm just going to tell you, I couldn't avoid it. There are 8 things I don't want you to miss in this story today when we're talking about the depth of all the hidden meanings in it. 8 things. Now, I had good homiletical training. Even Dr. John Castlein, when I first got here, I took a refresher course just to get caught up in some of the preaching techniques. And I'll tell you, every professor out there would have told me, never preach an 8-point sermon. That's suicide. Don't do it. And so this is not an 8-point sermon. It's a 1-point sermon with 8 subpoints. I refuse to violate any homiletical rule here, all right? It moves real quick, and I've already been convinced. One of these 8 points, it's going to be a bell ringer for you today. God's going to reveal something just you needed to hear. So I'll move quick. Here we go. Number 1, the scandalous request. You need to know right up the beginning when the son says, give me my inheritance, he's treating the Father like an ATM machine. Give me, give me, give me. And sometimes my prayers sound just like that. Praying to God, give me, give me, give me. As if the Father is just an ATM machine. And it would have been so scandalous, by the way, asking for your inheritance early in that ancient time. It was saying this, I want your stuff, but I don't want you. And some preachers have even suggested that this was telling the Father, I wish you were dead. Man, if you're the parent in this story, that would hurt. This isn't just normal rebelliousness. This is a betrayal of a love that only a parent can understand. When the Pharisees heard this, they would have been thinking in their mind, you should beat that child within an inch of their life. But the Father does something scandalous. He says yes. And no father back then would have done that. Listen, some of you got big questions, and I love sitting down and dissecting these questions with you. I love anyone who's investigating Christianity. If you've ever had that gnawing question, why does God allow bad things to happen in this world? Why doesn't God do something about the evil if he really is God? Listen, one of the greatest gifts God ever gave mankind was to give them free will. God doesn't force himself on you. He wants you to choose him. So God gives free will. Could he have made us all robots who just obeyed? He could have. But then he would have never known the joy of having someone choosing to love him. Yeah, when someone chooses to love you, that feels great. But in order to experience that, you have to give them free will. And sometimes people use their free will for good, and sometimes they use it for evil. Sometimes they use it for light, and sometimes they use it for darkness. And that's just the truth of it. God didn't make us robots. And so sometimes there's evil in the world. This young man's request is scandalous. Second high point in the story. In ancient Israel, the pigs matter more than you realize. All right. To show the depth that this boy falls into, Jesus uses one word, pigs. All right. We have some pig farmers here. One of them came up to me last Sunday and he was like, dude, how much longer are you going to crash down on the pig thing, you know? And I was like, man, I'm so sorry that it stinks. In ancient Jewish times, and the ancient Jewish listener, in their world, pigs meant disgrace. Pigs meant uncleanness, all right? And no good Jewish boy would have ever allowed himself to fall to that level. Jesus, in his masterfully told story, allows for the boy to find himself in that pit. He's not only broke, he's not only bankrupt, he's not only hungry, but now he's in a pig pen, and now He's even allowed himself to desire to eat what the pigs are eating. This is Jesus showing this boy at rock bottom. And sometimes, for God to get someone's attention, he has to let you hit rock bottom. It happens. In that moment, though, something comes back alive in the boy. Number 3, he came to himself. Number 3, he came to himself. Your version might say he came to his senses, but the actual wording here is he came to himself, which implies that he doesn't have his true identity anymore. He's lost who he truly is. And sure enough, you indulge in squandering your inheritance and wild living, and you live in a sin-filled life like that, you begin to lose a little bit of who you are. And you're way off track from what God intended for you. And in this moment, in this story, Jesus uses this phrase, he came to himself. It's almost like an awakening happening in him. And anyone who's turned from a lifestyle that was not healthy and good, they also describe it like, I had an awakening in my life. I've come to myself. I'm getting back to who God made me to be. And so in this moment, the boy heads home. Number 4, the father runs was scandalous. Again, back to ancient Jewish times. No patriarch of that time would ever run. It implied that you were in a hurry. It implied that you weren't good at scheduling. You weren't wise in how you put your day together. It meant lifting robes. It meant exposing legs. It meant losing dignity in the public. No patriarch back then ran. And the fact that Jesus has his father grab his robe, hike it up, and take off running for the boy is just pure grace. The Pharisees would not have liked this part of the story. But Jesus tells it this way. He's revealing something about the Father you all don't understand, how much he loves a sinner who comes back to him. There's more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents. There's more joy in the presence of the angels, Jesus says. Well, who's in the presence of the angels? God. And when you and I come back in a relationship to him, he does backflips. Yeah. The son wanted probation, but the father gives him restoration, which is incredible. That brings us to number 5. Every item the father gives has meaning. The robe was meant to cover his shame. You don't carry your shame when you're in a relationship with the Father. Have we all messed up? Absolutely, we've all messed up, and I'm chief sinner of them all. But in God, he wraps that robe around me. My shame is covered. Oh, in earthly eyes, they may still see my shame, but not in his eyes anymore. And then that ring, bring him a ring, that represents family authority. You're a child of mine. You get the ring. Nobody else gets the ring. You get the ring. And then there's the sandals. Servants didn't wear sandals, but the children of the household did. When you saw them out in public, if you couldn't tell the servants from the children, it was easy. You looked down at their feet because servants didn't have sandals. Bring them a pair of sandals was representative of being in the family again. The fatted calf represents the sacrifice, and the feast represents that not only is my relationship to my lost son restored, it's not only saved, but it's restored. It's celebrated now. Everything has meaning in the story. Again, just makes you pause and says, how did Jesus do stories like this? There's a couple more. Number 6, the older brother is a hidden focus in the story. This whole parable Jesus begins it with this. A man had 2 sons. Somewhere along the way, we're the ones who gave it the little title, The Story of the Prodigal Son, but it should have really been The Story of the Prodigal Sons. Should have been plural, not singular. Because even though the lost son takes up so much of the story, the hidden brother in all of this is also a big part of the story. in the context, the religious leaders, did they know that they were the older brother in the story? You better believe they did. This is why they will allow a hatred for Jesus to grow in them to a point it will explode and they will kill Jesus, because they knew he weaved them into several of his stories. They're the older brother in this thing. Yeah. Number 7, I just couldn't get around and I had to share it. The story ends unfinished on purpose. The lost sheep is found. That story finishes. The lost coin is found. That story finishes. But the story of the prodigal sons, will the brother come into the celebration or not? We don't know. Jesus ends the story purposefully without answering that question. It's just incredible. It allows each... By the way, do some Pharisees become believers in Jesus Christ? They do. Do some priests become believers and followers of Jesus Christ? They do. We're told that in the book of Acts. But do all of them? No. And so it's almost like a question that he hangs on the religious people of that day. Are you going to come into the celebration of the Father or not? But number 8 was the bell ringer for me. The father goes out to both sons. This would have been easy to miss, but the father leaves the house to run to the lost son. The father leaves the house to go out and beg the older brother to come in. That the father is a pursuing father in this story. Yeah, he's a pursuing father, all right. He's been chasing you like a pack of dogs. And you think you got invited here by accident? You think you're here just because my friend's been bugging me, I just said yeah. What do you think this is all about? God strategically uses divine appointments. He puts people in your path because he's pursuing you. And it doesn't matter if you're a good person or a bad person. It doesn't matter if you've totally shipwrecked your life or if you've just not had a lot of attention for the Father anymore. He's looking for you. He wants this relationship with you. What's the big point of the story? Here it is, simple. You and I only run best when we have the Father's values. The son turned his back on the father's values and he shipwrecked his life horribly, totally spiritually bankrupt, in pig pen, just the rock bottom that you can possibly get. But the older brother, who was a fairly good guy, also wasn't running on the father's values, and bitterness came into his heart. And bitterness is just about as destructive as sin is. What are the Father's values that Jesus is elevating in the story? Love, forgiveness, generosity, mercy. That's the fuel we run best on. You know, everybody's talking about fuel prices these days, gas prices, you know. You notice they're a little bit high? They're a little high. Okay. And they're talking about it on news networks. They're talking about it on talk radio. The president's constantly answering questions about it. People are constantly criticizing it about it. We're all wondering. It's a heartache for all of us. Gas prices seem to be right at the top of our mind. If there was an alternative that my car ran on, I would be using that, all right? But there isn't an alternative. My car only runs on petrol. That's it. And if I try to put something else in that, it's going to break down. The human heart, by God, was meant to run on his value systems. And if you're not running on his value system, you're headed for a breakdown. And so today, this whole story, even with all the subpoints, it really has only one point. It calls all of us, whether we're good or bad, whether we're believers or non-believers, whether we're religious or rebels, it calls us back to realign our life with the Father's values. You will run best in this world if you have a tank full of love, a tank full of forgiveness, a tank full of generosity, and a tank full of mercy. Someone close to you needs that from you. So how about it? The older son's story is, we don't know what happened. How about your story today?